I'm Caroline Mercer, 26 years old, and I knew from the moment I stepped onto that rooftop ballroom that my father was planning something. The way he smiled too tightly, shook hands like he was running for office, barely looked me in the eye. I could feel it coming. There was a folder in my purse, thick with signatures and dollar signs, but I hadn't planned to use it, not unless he forced my hand. And when he stood up in front of 100 guests, tapped his glass for silence, and announced I was no longer part of the family legacy, well, that was his choice, not mine. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away from what others expected of you. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, the only daughter in a family that measured success in courtroom victories and Ivy League diplomas. My father, Richard Mercer, was a partner at Mercer & Lowry, a firm founded by his grandfather. My mother, Susan, was always elegant and well-meaning, but her loyalty was fixed. Every generation of Mercer had gone to Yale, then Yale Law, then taken a seat behind a mahogany desk with their name etched in brass. That path wasn't a suggestion, it was an inheritance. Growing up, the message was clear: be polished, be composed, be perfect. My cousins were already being groomed for the firm by the time they were in high school, Deborah in litigation, Matt in finance. I was supposed to be the crown jewel, the firstborn, the natural heir. But while they were playing debate tournaments, I was dismantling old computers in the garage. My hands were always stained with ink, my notebooks full of flowcharts and logic problems. By 13, I was writing code just to see if I could. I built a calendar app for my school's library before I was old enough to drive. My dad never once asked how it worked. He'd pat my head, call me quirky, and remind me not to let hobbies distract from the real goal. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with symmetrical hedges and imported stone driveways. But even with all that comfort, I always felt like I was performing. At school, I was the straight-A girl with a last name that meant something. At home, I was the disappointment who didn't want to wear the Mercer legacy, like a second skin. I enrolled at Columbia, declared a double major in computer science and ethics. My father sent back the course registration form with one line highlighted in red ink. Is this a joke? I didn't respond. I knew by then that trying to explain myself only opened the door for more lectures. Freshman year, I met Lauren. She was a design student with a quiet intensity and a fierce commitment to digital privacy. We started talking about her aunt's medical data being sold without consent. It made my blood run cold. That night, we stayed up building a rough prototype of a software tool that could flag unauthorized data transfers in real time. We called it Sentinel Gate. I didn't tell my parents about any of it. Not when we found a business student, Josh, to help with modeling. Not when we applied for a small campus grant under my middle name. I scrubbed every connection to the Mercer name. No one in the startup world knew who I really was, and that was the point. I didn't want my father's reputation buying me credibility I hadn't earned. By junior year, the pressure from home got louder. My father started calling with friendly check-ins that turned into interrogations. Had I taken the LSAT yet? Why wasn't I applying to clerkships? One day my meal card stopped working. A week later, my housing stipend vanished. When I called my mom, all she said was, "Your father needs to see that you're serious about law school before he keeps helping." That was the moment something shifted in me. The first time the money stopped, I thought it was a mistake. I was in the middle of midterms. The weather had just turned cold wind pushing down over the city, and I remember standing outside the bursar's office with my coat pulled tight and my heart beating in my ears. My meal card had been declined twice that day, and the housing deposit for the next term was flagged as overdue. I checked my student portal, my bank account, even called the office to ask if there'd been a glitch. There hadn't. That weekend, I lived on a box of stale saltines and 2 spoonfuls of peanut butter I'd found in the back of a kitchen drawer. I didn't tell Lauren or Josh. We were already stretched thin trying to meet a demo deadline for Sentinel Gate. They were pulling long nights as it was juggling school and code and stress that clung to us like static. So I waited until Sunday evening and called my mother. Her voice was quiet but not soft. I asked her about the payments, why they weren't going through, if something had changed with the account. There was a pause, and then she said, "Your father thinks it's time you show some real commitment to the family's expectations." That was the phrase she used, real commitment. I didn't say anything back. I just held the phone to my ear and stared at the blue glow of my laptop screen. She didn't ask how I was managing, didn't ask if I had food or rent covered. She just let the silence stretch, then told me to take care of myself and hung up. That was when I stopped asking for help. I picked up 2 short-term freelance contracts, small cybersecurity audits for local law offices, and an online retailer. Nothing glamorous, but enough to keep the lights on and buy groceries. I carved out weekends, gave up sleep, and started pulling long stretches of 20-hour workdays classes. Code consulting repeat. My grades dipped a little. Not enough to raise alarms, but enough that professors stopped expecting me to raise my hand. That was fine. I wasn't there to impress anyone anymore. By March, Sentinel Gate had a working prototype. We launched a closed beta with 25 users, mostly student volunteers and friends of friends. Within the first week, the system flagged 2 unauthorized data transfers. One of them was from a campus fitness app sending private health data to a third-party ad network. Lauren nearly jumped out of her chair when she saw the report. I just sat there and watched the dashboard blinking steadily as the metrics rolled in. That night, we got a message from Natalie, our angel investor from Brooklyn. She was impressed. She looped in someone from a fintech startup, a compliance officer named Jason, who offered to pilot the software if we could get it integrated. I stared at the message on my phone for a long time before handing it to Josh. He read it, nodded slowly, then said, "We might be onto something. I wanted to tell someone, not Natalie, not Lauren. I mean someone from home. I thought about calling my dad, just to say, here's what we've built." But I didn't. Instead, I opened my inbox and found an email from him, subject line in all caps, "Course correction." Inside was a glossy brochure for a legacy fellowship at Yale Law. There was no greeting, no question, just a line at the bottom, "There's still time to fix this." I didn't reply. Around that time, I started hearing things. Small comments from people back home. Friends of the family would email me casually. "Your dad says you're still figuring things out." Or, "He says you're exploring creative options before settling down." Some of them didn't mention me at all. At one dinner party, I was told later he referred to me as the one we don't talk about. That part was harder than I expected. I had never needed his praise. But hearing that he'd erased me cleanly like a mistake on a form that landed differently. So I worked harder. Lauren started calling our apartment the war room. Every corner held cables, wires, sticky notes with server logs. I'd fall asleep at the table and wake up with code still running on the screen. Josh brought in his friend from undergrad to help with back-end testing. We didn't have salaries or contracts, just shared spreadsheets and a wall calendar with the word maybe written across the next 2 months. Then one day, Natalie sent over a term sheet. It was simple, clean margins, plain language. Her fund was offering $250,000 in seed capital in exchange for 12% equity. Not a fortune, but enough. We could finally hire a dedicated engineer. We could pay for compliance testing. We could move out of our apartment and into an actual space with desks that didn't double as kitchen counters. But to accept the deal, I had to come out. Natalie said it on our follow-up call. "We'll need to list you as legal CEO Caroline. That means your full name, no more initials, no more hiding." I didn't answer right away. That night I sat on the fire escape, the metal cold under my palms, and watched the lights of the city flicker on one by one. Lauren brought out 2 beers, handed me one, and didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally she said, You know they can't ignore you if they know what you've built. I nodded. But once they know, they can't pretend I failed anymore. She looked at me for a second, then said, "Exactly." The next morning, I signed the documents and sent them back. When Natalie replied, she only wrote one word: "Finally." We moved into a co-working space in Brooklyn, tucked between a telehealth startup and a guy building something for virtual dog training. It didn't matter. We had desks, real chairs, whiteboards that didn't smudge. Sentinel Gate was still in closed beta, but we had over 100 users now and 2 mid-sized insurance platforms asking to schedule demos. My parents still thought I was working retail part-time. They sent me links to LSAT boot camps. My father emailed me a list of prep courses, CCing a junior partner from his firm. "Just in case you're ready to get serious," he wrote. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Lauren instead with the subject line, "My formal resignation from the Mercer Empire." She laughed, but we both knew it wasn't a joke. Graduation was 6 weeks away. I hadn't sent in my RSVP for the family dinner, but I knew there would be one. There would be speeches, photos, a celebration of what they thought I'd become, what they hoped I still was. And I had a feeling something was coming. Something I couldn't quite name, like a wire pulled too tight just waiting to snap. I didn't know it yet, but that night on a rooftop filled with white roses and polished cutlery, he would say the words out loud. And I would be ready. The rooftop ballroom was quiet just for a second after he said it. My father's voice still hung in the air, carried through the speakers. I could feel every pair of eyes turned toward me. Family faculty guests from law firms who thought they were attending a celebration. The word disowned wasn't used, but that's what it was. He announced that I was no longer part of the Mercer legacy. That effective immediately, I was on my own. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I walked to the front of the room and set the manila folder down in front of him. Then I walked back to my table, picked up my clutch, and left without waiting for dessert. Outside, the wind had picked up. It pressed against my blazer. As I waited for the elevator, the sound of distant traffic below, humming steady and low. A minute later, Lauren stepped out behind me. What was in the folder, she asked. I told her it was the term sheet, $12 million in Series A funding with my name at the top. She nodded. We didn't say much else on the way down. That night, I didn't go online. I left my phone on the dresser and tried to sleep. Around 3 a.m, I got up, made a cup of tea, and sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet. I don't know how long I stayed there. By sunrise, the photo had made it out. Someone at the dinner had taken a picture, me sliding the folder across the table, my father frozen mid-reach, his face half-shadowed. It showed up on a private alumni board, then spread to LinkedIn, then Twitter. The captions came quickly. Startup founder ousted at family graduation dinner. 12 million reasons to walk away. Mercer daughter drops law legacy for tech empire. By noon, I had more than 700 new beta signups and 4 messages from enterprise firms asking for demos. I turned my phone face down and went for a walk. That weekend, I didn't go to the office. I didn't check email. I didn't respond to texts. Lauren gave me space. She didn't push or ask, just left a cup of coffee on the counter in the mornings and went about her day. I spent a lot of time sitting on the floor again, the soft hum of our old radiator filling the silence. Sunday night, I finally cried, just once, in the shower with the towel still wrapped around my shoulders. Not for him, for the girl who used to sit at the family dinner table and hope one day he'd say he was proud. By Monday, I was back at my desk. Sentinel Gate's traffic was up 3,000%. The back-end team was scrambling to stabilize servers, and Lauren had already rescheduled 2 meetings with Natalie to go over PR handling. I kept my answers short, stuck to the script. I'm Caroline Mercer. I co-founded Sentinel Gate to protect people's data. That's our story. Everything else I left alone. But the rest of the world didn't. By Tuesday afternoon, the firm my father worked at released a public statement: private family matters should remain private. But leaks started trickling out. Staff members talked. Someone from inside the firm confirmed that the dinner had caused embarrassment with clients. Another source said 3 investors had paused deals over reputational concerns. My father didn't say anything to me directly, not at first, but then I got a text. No greeting, no punctuation. Just what the hell did you give me? The press is calling nonstop. Take it down. I didn't respond. That night, I sat across from Natalie at a quiet coffee shop in Soho. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just looked at me and said, "They're circling. TechCrunch wants a quote. Forbes wants to feature you." "What do you want to do?" I said. "We go forward." She nodded. Later that week, someone rang our buzzer. It was almost 9. Lauren and I were both still at our laptops finishing updates to the security protocols when we heard it. A sharp buzz once then again. I walked to the door but didn't open it. I could see him through the glass, my father. Hands in his coat pockets, pacing. He stayed for a few minutes. Then he left something taped to the door. A letter. No envelope. Just a folded page, and his handwriting in fountain pen. It wasn't an apology. "You've made this personal. If your company damages my reputation, I will respond accordingly. No. Dear Caroline, no love, Dad." Just the threat. I folded it once more, placed it in the drawer beside my bed, and turned the lock. Natalie and I met again the next morning. I told her about the letter. She looked at me across the table and said, "He's unraveling." I didn't say anything. She took a sip of her coffee and added, "Then you've already won." But it didn't feel like winning. That night we had takeout in the office. Just 6 of us, me, Lauren, Josh, our 2 engineers, and a junior developer we'd brought in during beta testing. We sat around a folding table with mismatched chairs and a whiteboard full of bugs. Lauren raised her glass of sparkling water. "To the legacy we choose," she said. Everyone clinked glasses. The next morning, I got an email from my mother. The subject line just said, "Be careful. Inside, you've embarrassed your father. He's angry. You don't know what he's capable of when cornered." I read it 3 times. There wasn't a single word of comfort in it. Only fear. I didn't reply. Instead, I met with the development team to prep for the pilot we were starting with a healthcare provider in Oregon. Real clients, real systems, real stakes. It was our first enterprise rollout, and everything had to go smoothly. The setup took days: compliance checks, training sessions, review meetings. But it worked. No crashes, no leaks. The software did what we said it would do. After the paperwork was signed, I sat at my desk and stared at the contract. I didn't move for a long time. It wasn't the money. It was what it meant. We had built something real, and we had done it without the Mercer name behind us. The next morning, the Forbes feature dropped. The founder who quietly built a fortress. They only mentioned my family once. A single line near the end. Mercer, the daughter of a prominent legal family, declined to comment on her public disowning at graduation. That was all it took. My inbox filled within the hour. Old classmates, former professors, even someone I dated back in sophomore year, they all reached out. Some sent congratulations. Others said they always knew I'd do something big. Most of them I didn't answer, but one message stopped me. It was from my mother. I read the article. "You looked beautiful in the photo. I'm not writing to defend your father. I just want you to know I watched the dinner unfold and I didn't stop him. That's my shame to carry. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No excuses, no deflection, just honesty." I bookmarked it. Didn't write back. Not yet. And then, just when I thought it was over, a letter arrived. A real one. Handwritten. from my grandfather. He and I had never been close. He was quiet, formal, always more interested in my father's career than anyone else's. But somehow the story had reached him. "Caroline," he wrote, "I spent my life believing the family name was the only thing worth preserving. But perhaps you've shown us something more important, the power of walking away from what corrupts you. I am proud of you, even if your father never says it. Granddad." I read it twice, then a third time. And for the first time in weeks, I felt still. The kind of stillness that comes after something breaks wide open. The next day, we met with the team again, plans for expansion upgrades, another pitch scheduled in San Francisco. There was more to build, more to protect, and I was no longer looking back. 3 weeks after graduation, I flew to San Francisco for the first time in my life. It was early June, and the city was cool in that way that catches you off guard when the sun looks brighter than it feels. I arrived with a carry-on bag, a laptop, and a presentation deck loaded with numbers I'd checked so many times I could have recited them in my sleep. We were scheduled to pitch at a venture forum in Soma, one of those clean glass buildings with minimalist signage and just enough furniture to look intentional. Lauren had flown out the day before with Josh, and we were set to present in the afternoon block. I didn't sleep much the night before. At 2 a.m., I sat by the hotel window watching lights flicker across the bay. The buzz of the city was softer than New York, but it still hummed with movement. I checked my phone once. Nothing from my father, nothing new from my mother. Just one message from my grandfather sent the night before, a line from his letter repeated again, "Keep going." By morning, the nerves settled into something steady. Not confidence exactly, just clarity. At the forum, we checked in clipped on our badges and waited backstage with a dozen other founders. Some were dressed like they were heading into a board meeting, others in sweatshirts and sneakers. I wore a navy blazer over a black top, clean, simple, and sharp enough to keep me grounded. They called our name just after 2. The room wasn't massive, but it was full rows of chairs, a few cameras, notepads in the hands of investors who didn't blink much. The screen behind us lit up with our logo. I walked onto the stage, looked out across the crowd, and spoke the first line. "This is Sentinel Gate. We don't sell fear. We build defense." The rest came naturally. I talked about data privacy, the blind spots in current systems, the way health records and consumer data moved without consent. I showed the pilot numbers from Oregon, uptime flagging accuracy, early feedback. I kept my voice steady even as I felt the room quiet down. And then at the end, I stepped aside to take questions. That's when I saw him. He was standing in the back near the exit. No badge, no press pass, just a gray suit, and his hands clasped behind him. He wasn't looking at the stage. He was looking at me. I didn't pause. I answered the questions. I nodded where needed. I wrapped up like we had practiced. When it was over, I walked calmly off stage. In the hallway outside the main room, Lauren caught up with me first. "You did great," she said, breathless. I nodded, but I didn't stop walking. I turned the corner, glanced back once. He was gone. Later that night, we celebrated in our hotel room. We ordered sushi and opened a bottle of champagne that Josh had somehow packed in his checked bag. We ate on the floor, our laptops nearby, the pitch deck still open and half highlighted. Lauren raised her glass. To building what they said we couldn't. We clinked glasses. There wasn't much talking after that. The next morning, I visited my grandfather. He lived just outside Sacramento in a one-story house with ivy on the back fence and an old porch swing that creaked when it moved. He met me at the door, thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp. He handed me a folded newspaper with the Forbes article clipped to the front. "You've rewritten the name," he said. I didn't know what to say, so I sat with him for a while. He poured coffee. We didn't talk about my father. We didn't talk about the dinner. We just sat two people who understood the weight of what had been carried and what had been set down. Later that afternoon, I flew home. When I stepped back into the office the next morning, there was a letter waiting for me. This one wasn't from my grandfather. It was from the executive board at one of the insurance platforms we'd been in talks with. They wanted to move forward officially. Full rollout 3-state implementation scheduled onboarding by the end of the quarter. Lauren read the email twice before speaking. "It's happening," I nodded. "Yeah, it is." The deal wasn't glamorous, no headlines, no splashy PR announcement, but it was real. It was revenue. It was proof that what we had built mattered beyond press, beyond noise, beyond legacy. For the rest of the day, we worked through the details, contract language timelines, resource allocation. There was no time to sit still. But sometime around 7 p.m., I stood at the whiteboard dry erase marker still in hand and realized something. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to him, not to them, not even to myself. That night, as the sun dropped behind the rooftops and cast long shadows across the desks, I stayed back a few extra minutes. The team had gone home. The hallway was quiet. I stood by the window looking out at the street below. A car passed headlights sweeping across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a siren faded into silence. I thought about that rooftop ballroom. The folder, the glass of water I had set down before standing up. I hadn't known then what would follow. The headlines, the pressure, the people who would reach out months later just to say they'd seen the moment online. And yet it all came back to that choice, to walk away. The voicemail came in the middle of a Tuesday. I was on my way back from a quick meeting with a product consultant someone Natalie had introduced us to. It had been a straightforward conversation, just notes on user experience and a few compliance touch points we needed to shore up before scaling beyond the healthcare sector. I was walking through a quiet stretch of Hudson Street when my phone buzzed in my pocket. No caller ID, no text. Just a red notification bubble on my screen and a timestamp 2:14 p.m. I didn't check it right away. I finished the walk, stopped to grab a coffee, and headed back to the office. Lauren was on a call when I came in. Josh was scribbling something on the whiteboard. The room smelled like takeout and old expo markers. I sat down at my desk, unlocked my phone, and hit play. It was him. My father's voice steady at first, then not. "I don't know what you think you've proven," he said. "But this game you're playing, it has consequences. You've dragged the family name through the press, and now clients are asking questions. Your little project may have its moment, but don't think for a second it changes what matters." He paused. "You had a place here. You chose to burn it down. No goodbye, no signature, just silence." I sat with the phone in my lap, the screen gone dark. Outside, the sun had started to shift toward late afternoon, pulling longer shadows across the floor. Lauren glanced over. "Everything okay?" I nodded, or maybe I didn't. I don't remember answering. I stepped into the hallway, stood by the window, and looked down at the street. People moved like they always did, too busy to notice anything above them. I stayed there until the voicemail expired off the screen. That evening, I walked home instead of taking the train. It gave me space to think, to breathe. I remembered the week we moved into that tiny Brooklyn workspace, how we'd stacked used monitors on borrowed desks and shared one electric kettle for tea and ramen. I remembered how Lauren had duct-taped a cardboard sign that read, "This is where it starts," to the inside of the front door. It was still there. A few days later, we got the final approval on our rollout. Sentinel Gate was set to launch across 3 states' employee systems, patient records, back-end logs. It was the first time I'd seen real numbers with 6 zeros attached to our work. Not projected earnings, not investor interest, real revenue. Natalie brought cupcakes into the office. Josh popped a bottle of cider. We didn't say much. We just stood around the whiteboard, all of us still in our chairs, quietly watching a new message ping into the company inbox. Another potential client. That week, I started sleeping more. Not because the pressure was gone, but because the foundation felt steadier. The company was real. The contracts were signed. And every time I sat down to write an email or review a security log, I could feel it, that quiet weight shifting, from building to growing. A few people reached out from the old world. One of my professors from Columbia forwarded me an article from Fast Company with a note. Proud to have had you in class. A former classmate emailed, "My firm's looking for a better privacy tool. Can we talk?" I replied to both, short and polite, nothing more. The only message I didn't answer was the one from home. My mother had sent a photo, an old one. I was maybe 8 or 9, sitting at the kitchen table with a plastic keyboard in front of me, wires scattered across a placemat. My hair was pulled back in a lopsided ponytail, and my face was serious, focused. "You always liked puzzles," her message read. There was no other text, just the picture and that line. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't delete it, but I didn't reply. A few days after that, we held our first real team meeting off-site. Nothing fancy, just a rented conference room and a stack of printouts. We talked about hiring, scaling, building out our customer support tools. For the first time, I could see it, how this thing we started on a kitchen table was beginning to outgrow our hands. After the meeting, Lauren and I walked 2 blocks to a cafe. We sat in the back, the hum of conversations around us, just loud enough to blur the quiet between us. She stirred her tea, then looked up. "You've been quieter lately," she said. I nodded. "It's been a lot." She waited, then asked, "Are you okay?" I thought about it. About the rooftop dinner, the folder, the press, the email from my grandfather, the voicemail from my father, and then I said, "I think I'm starting to be." She didn't press. We finished our tea, walked back to the office, and went back to work. That Friday, Natalie pulled me into a side call. "There's interest," she said. "A lot of it. Not just investors. Media, policy advisors. They want to know what you've built and, more importantly, how you've done it." I listened. She listed names, outlets, panels. Then she paused. "But I need to know where you stand. Do you want to be the story, Caroline, or just the builder behind it?" I didn't answer right away. I walked to the window, the same one where I'd stood after listening to that voicemail. This time, the city looked different. That night, I sat alone at my desk. Lights dimmed, the soft sound of keyboard clicks fading behind me as people left for the evening. I opened a blank document and wrote down 5 words. It started with a firewall. Then I hit save, because something was changing, and I had a choice to make. The decision came quietly. One morning in late August, I called Natalie and told her I was ready. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "Then let's begin," and scheduled 3 back-to-back interviews, 2 with national outlets, 1 with an independent tech podcast that had been following Sentinel Gate since the early beta days. No flashy press rollout, no glossy features, just my story told straight. We prepped in a quiet conference room near the office, just Natalie and me. She laid out notes and messaging points while I sat across from her with my laptop closed, hands resting on the table. "You don't owe anyone your past," she said, "but you've earned the right to speak." I nodded. "We focus on the work, the mission." She leaned back in her chair. "The story is the work, Caroline. Just tell it clean." The interviews happened over 3 days. I spoke plainly how Sentinel Gate started with a mock-up built in our apartment, how we tested it through finals and server crashes, how we landed our first client through word of mouth and trust, not branding. I mentioned the funding, the pilot programs, and the enterprise contracts now expanding into new sectors. I didn't mention my father, not until the final question of the last interview. The reporter looked down at his notepad, then asked, "Do you still speak to your family?" I paused. I speak to the people who saw me for who I was, even when I hadn't done anything yet. He didn't push. The next morning, the articles ran, not all at once, but in waves, quiet at first, then steady. The headlines were measured. Sentinel Gate CEO leads quiet cybersecurity revolution. From dorm room to data defense, the rise of Caroline Mercer. Some included my family's name in passing. Some didn't mention it at all. Then came the panel request. A national policy conference wanted me to speak on ethical data design. It wasn't a flashy tech stage. It was more formal wood-paneled walls, a modest podium, and an audience that included lawmakers, university deans, and leaders from both public and private sectors. Lauren encouraged me to accept. Natalie said it would cement us as serious players. So I flew to D.C., checked into a quiet hotel near the venue, and reviewed my notes one last time. The morning of the event, I walked through the side entrance just as the sun crested over the buildings. Inside it was calm. Staff in dark suits moved between tables. Name tags were arranged in neat rows on linen-covered stands. Mine was tucked in the middle, Caroline Mercer, founder and CEO, Sentinel Gate. I clipped it on and made my way to the prep room. The talk went as planned. 10 minutes, no slides, just a microphone and my voice. I spoke about the value of digital consent, how small systems create real-world consequences when overlooked, and why ethical software starts with asking better questions. When I finished, the room held still for a second before the applause began. Afterward, I stepped into the hallway and found a bench by the windows. I sat down, folded my hands, and took a slow breath. That's when I saw the text. A number I didn't recognize. Just 2 words. He's here. Before I could reply, the second message came. Standing near the back, wearing gray. I looked up, scanned the crowd gathering beyond the hallway. And there he was, my father. His posture was familiar. Arms crossed, shoulders stiff. He wasn't speaking to anyone. Just watching. I didn't move. I didn't wave. I just sat waiting to see what he'd do next. He didn't approach. He stayed for another minute, maybe 2, then turned and walked out through the same doors I'd used that morning. I didn't follow him. Instead, I stood, walked slowly back to the room where our panelists were gathering, and rejoined the others. That night back at the hotel, I sat by the window and let the quiet settle in. It was a different kind of silence than before, not the absence of noise, but the closing of something unfinished. The next day, I returned to New York. The office felt the same whiteboard, half-full cables coiled in corners, the low buzz of typing and conversation. Lauren handed me a cup of coffee and asked how it went. He showed up, I said. She looked at me. Did you talk? No. She nodded once. That's probably enough. A week later, I received an envelope at the office. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Inside was a single piece of stationery. One sentence, I see it now. That was all. I didn't respond, but I kept the note. That Friday, we signed our second multi-state contract, this one with a national education nonprofit that had been struggling with third-party data leaks. The project would roll out over 6 months and reach nearly 200 schools. Our small team gathered in the corner lounge, pulled together folding chairs, and toasted with lukewarm coffee and grocery store cookies. I looked around the room, Josh sketching new API flows on a napkin, Lauren checking user feedback on her tablet, one of our engineers watching the dashboard light up with new installations. It didn't feel like a climax. It felt like a beginning. Later that evening, I walked home alone. The city was loud, summer still clinging to the sidewalks. I passed the old building where we used to work, where Lauren once taped that cardboard sign to the inside of the door. I wondered if it was still there. At the crosswalk, I paused and looked up at the windows. The lights were off. but I knew what had started inside. Not just the company. Me. 6 months after that first pilot went live, I stood in front of a crowd of 500. Investors, journalists, other founders, even a few industry leaders I'd only ever seen quoted in trade magazines. The event was part of a cybersecurity summit in Boston. Sentinel Gate had been invited to deliver the closing keynote. Our Series A had just closed $6.5 million secured from a top-tier venture firm. Lauren and I had rehearsed the presentation a dozen times, refined every chart, checked and rechecked every slide. When I stepped onto the stage, the logo behind me lit up in white against a dark blue background. I held the clicker steady in one hand and began with the story. Not the family version, not the disowning, just the work. How we started with nothing but an idea and a shared frustration. How data wasn't just a commodity, it was identity. And how the people most affected by breaches were the ones with the fewest options. I walked them through the model, showed the metrics, talked about integrity checks, real-time alerts, early success with the school systems, and the nonprofit rollout. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. When I finished, the applause was long, not loud, just steady, the kind that keeps going a beat longer than expected. I stepped off stage and made my way to the back hallway where the speakers waited. There was water on a table, a few folding chairs, quiet conversations. Lauren met me there smiling. "You did it," she said. I thanked her, still catching my breath, and then I saw him, standing near the back of the reception space next to a tall display board and a stack of glossy brochures. Gray suit, no name tag, no drink in hand. He wasn't talking to anyone, just watching. My father. He wasn't listed among the guests. He wasn't part of any delegation or corporate sponsor. But someone must have sent him the live stream link, or maybe he read about it online and decided to come. Either way, there he was. I didn't freeze. I didn't rush. I stood for a moment, then turned toward my team. I didn't need a conversation. But as I walked past him, our eyes met. For the first time, there was no disappointment in his face, no frustration, no correction. It was quiet, a pause, a kind of stillness that felt unfamiliar. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't wait to find out. That night, we didn't go to some rooftop bar or fancy dinner. We went back to our office, ordered takeout from the sushi place down the street, and pulled together folding chairs around the main table. The 6 of us sat with mismatched plates and paper napkins, whiteboard markers still scattered across the corners. Someone had left a half-finished bug report open on the projector screen. Lauren raised her glass of ginger ale. "To the legacy we choose," she said. Everyone clinked glasses. I smiled. Not wide, not performative, just real. There weren't any framed awards on the walls. No plaques, no polished mahogany, just a stack of empty boxes near the door and a shared spreadsheet open on someone's laptop. But in that moment, I knew what we had built was more solid than any name ever written on a brass door plate. The next morning, I drove out to see my grandfather. His health had been up and down since the spring. The nurse met me at the porch, let me know he was resting in the front room. I found him sitting by the window, wrapped in a heavy cardigan, a blanket over his knees. He looked up when I came in. "You're on the front page again," he said, holding up a folded newspaper with the headline visible. It was the Business Weekly profile, the one that called Sentinel Gate a quiet powerhouse in data ethics. "You've elevated the name," he added. "You didn't run from it. You rose above it." I sat down next to him. We didn't say much after that. Just sat in the stillness of that small house, the air moving gently through the curtains, the quiet hum of an old wall clock marking time. Later, as I helped him to the kitchen for tea, he looked over at me and said, You know, sometimes it's not the loudest win that counts. Sometimes it's the one that makes people listen differently. I didn't answer, but I heard him. That evening I stood alone on the balcony of our building. The sun was going down. The city stretched wide beneath me, quiet for now, lit in soft orange and fading gray. I thought of that dinner nearly a year earlier. The ballroom, the folder, the walk to the elevator. I thought about the voicemail, the letter taped to the door, the single sentence he mailed later. I see it now. I stood on the balcony as the city shifted from sunset to the blue quiet of night. My hands rested on the railing, and I let myself breathe it all in the gentle hum below the memory of my grandfather's house, still fresh, and the simple warmth of being surrounded by people who had chosen me not out of duty, but because they believed in what we were building together. The old ache I used to feel when I thought of my father was there, but softer now, more like a distant echo than a wound. I realized I didn't need an apology from him to know my own worth. Some things can't be fixed by words, only by how you choose to move forward. Lauren stayed late that evening, tapping away at one of the new dashboards. We talked for a while, not about business or the next contract, but about where we'd come from and what mattered most now. I told her about my grandfather's words about what it felt like to finally see the family name written somewhere I could be proud of. She smiled, said, "You didn't have to run from it. You just had to make it your own." I think that's what justice really is. At least for me, not revenge, not public spectacle, but the quiet dignity of reclaiming your life when others tried to write your story for you. The Mercer name will always mean something to me, but it no longer tells me who I have to be. I carried forward the lessons that mattered, kindness, integrity, and the belief that you can build something better no matter where you start. I wish I could say everything wrapped up neatly. My mother sent a few more messages over the months. We spoke once or twice. We weren't close, but there was an understanding, a gentleness that replaced all the old anxiety. My father never reached out again, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was space I could finally fill with my own life, my own legacy. The company grew. Our team got bigger, our impact deeper. Some nights I'd walk past the office after everyone had left and see the light from the server room spilling out into the hallway. It reminded me that what we'd built was real, not just code or contracts, but a place where people could feel safe, valued, and seen. If you've ever felt like you had to fight for your place in the world or struggled to be seen for who you really are, I hope my story reminds you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go of the things that never served you and build something new, something that belongs to you alone. Thank you for listening and sharing this journey with me. If this story spoke to you, I hope you'll share your own or pass it along to someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome here.